Well, we are honored to be joined by a very special guest today that we'll get to in just a moment here on the Limitless Leadership Lounge. It's another week of a tri-generational conversation for emerging leaders. I'm John Gehring, joined as always by Coach Jim Johnson. Dr. Kareem taking some time in Bangladesh, so we'll hear from her hopefully in the following weeks or so as she returns to the States. But Coach, you've brought along an amazing guest today that I'm really excited to dive in with. So let's go ahead and introduce Greg.
Yeah, we actually, Greg was introduced by a fellow podcast host that had Greg on, and we've had Darren Pepper on our show, and then we're looking forward to talking to him. So, Greg Bennick is a world-class speaker, organizational consultant, and global event host whose ideas have inspired tens of thousands of people to take new approaches to productivity, focus, inspiration, and personal development. He engages with the audience in conversations that span borders, appearing in stages in 27 countries and counting. He is the founder and executive director of the international nonprofit in Haiti, 100forhaiti.org, which in 2010 he has listened to Haitian people to help transform an entire region's relationship with water, education, food, and housing. Most recently, Greg released a book called Reclaim the Moment: Seven Strategies to Build a Better Now that I recommended. It was a wonderful read. And he was also, which we'll delve into a little bit, a front of a punk band, rock band. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So, Greg, first of all, welcome to the Limitless Leadership Lounge.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to be here today.
Well, thanks. And we're looking forward to having you. And we're going to delve right in. Is that I know early in your life, I'd love to hear this story for our listeners about a skill that you actually still use today, called juggling. That in fact, when I read your book, I saw the video. I still got to practice because juggling is something I really enjoy watching and I struggle with. But tell us about that story, and then some of the lessons that you learned from, as far as because you do a lot of leadership talks and teamwork talks about what you learned about juggling, about leadership.
What I learned about leadership through juggling, you mean? Yeah,
Yes, yeah, I
yeah.
think that's what I was trying to say. So,
Yep, for sure. So I had one goal when I was 12 years old. I wanted to be the greatest coin collector who had ever lived. And my dad was a coin collector and to this day, still interested in coins. And I, at 12 years old, wanted to follow in his footsteps and become a coin collector. So at my school in Woodbury, Connecticut, where I was growing up, there were after school mini courses. And these mini courses, when I was in sixth grade, took the form of classes in baseball or Dungeons and Dragons, or it was basically everything from skills to hobbies to games. And after school on Wednesdays, you could sign up and be in a 6 week mini course on something you were interested in. Maybe it was gymnastics, maybe it was art. And I realized that there was no course that was going to put me on a track to be what I wanted to be, which was a coin collector. So I petitioned the school and said, I'd like there to be a class in coin collecting. And the school said, well, if you find somebody to teach this class in coin collecting, that we will then add the class. So I had my parents drive me to the next town over where there was a small coin store. And I walked in with a $5 bill in my pocket and said to the man behind the counter that my name is Greg Bennick and I go to the Woodbury Middle School, and I offered him $5 a week if he would teach me and my friends about coins. I pulled this $5 bill out of my pocket and he contemplated it for a moment. He took the $5 bill. He said, okay, you have a deal. And I went back to the school excitedly. I told them that I had found the guy who was going to teach this coin collecting class. The school put coin collecting on the roster of classes. And the next week in homeroom, we were all given a slip of paper that said what we needed to do was put on the first line at the top of the slip what our first choice was of a class. On the second line, put our second choice. On the third line, put our third choice. And what we did was submit those slips. I put coin collecting. If that wasn't available, I put coin collecting. If that wasn't available, I put coin collecting. It was a sure bet. And when I walked into the homeroom the next week and we got those slips back, the school secretary had made a mistake and had signed another student up for coin collecting. And my slip at the bottom where it said what we were signed up for said a word that I never anticipated seeing. It said juggling. So I thought to myself, wow, my life is over. This is absolutely ridiculous. I went into the class the next week. I walked in the door of the juggling class. And upon walking into the door, there was a young boy. He was standing about 10 feet in front of me. He was juggling three white baseballs. And as I looked at these baseballs flying in the air, the first thought that went through my mind was, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. It was like a
Wow.
light went on, like in a dark room. And I thought, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I excitedly ran home and told my parents, who assumed that my future was doomed because I wanted to be a juggler and not in finance. But to make a long story short, I ended up pursuing juggling, getting good at it, tucking my head into the coin collecting class from time to time, and to this day remain avidly involved nationally in coins and utilize juggling and other mechanisms of making people laugh and have a good time in my keynote speeches. So I ended up getting the best of both worlds.
It's
I
really
think
cool.
it's really cool that you didn't follow that traditional path, and that's something that I think a lot of young leaders are more empowered to do today, but still hesitant, which might make some sense. The doctor positions, the lawyer positions, those very well known as secure positions might feel like the safe path to go, but how did you keep that courage to continue along that path of this is what I want to do, despite hearing that criticism from those outside voices?
No, that's a good question because I didn't answer the second half of Coach's question, which is what did I learn from about leadership through juggling? And so you raise a really interesting point. Uh, the traditional path, as it were, is increasingly dated as the tradition ages. Meaning, if I told you and you were 19, 18, 17 years old, guess what? Here's what you do in life. You're going to go to college, you're going to graduate, you're going to get a job, you're going to be able to afford a home. Fallacy number one. You're going to stay at the same job your entire life. Fallacy number two. Upon staying at that job, you're going to be rewarded for your devotion. Fallacy number three. That's ridiculous what I just said. Not so much 80 years ago. Made perfect sense 80 years ago. So the traditional paths that people followed, that's an outdated mode of thinking. And I didn't realize that then. I would be very egotistical if I said to you, I was a visionary at age 12, and I realized that we would someday be talking about outdated modes of traditional career path thinking. No, that's absolutely wrong. I just thought juggling was cool. Here's the lesson in leadership. I thought juggling was cool. And today, I think coin collecting is cool. Go out in the world and put on your dating profile or as the first thing you say when you meet somebody new, hi, juggling and coin collecting are cool. See how your social status increases. I'm going to guess that it doesn't. But in my mind, I thought this is cool. I'm going to stick with this because I think it's cool. And that was important. That's a leadership lesson. It's a leadership lesson in perseverance because, of course, other people didn't think it was cool. But it's a leadership lesson in listening to yourself. And it's a leadership lesson in the midst of adversity. We don't just push through. I don't want to sound like Greg/Tony Robbins here. We don't just push through adversity. We stay true to ourselves. We stay true to ourselves. And I think that's a leadership lesson. I
Mhm.
think it's a valuable one too. And along the way, other opportunities open themselves up to me because I made that choice. We'll talk about me being in a punk band, sure. We'll talk about my keynotes and performances, sure. Why did those things happen? They happened because I stayed true to myself about the juggling and the coin collecting and other things early on. That life lesson taught me a lot because my dad followed a traditional career path.
Mhm.
And I saw how at times unhappy he was. And what got him through was thinking as an individual amidst that. And, I talk about it in my book and all throughout the book, but it was him thinking as an individual while he worked a traditional, dare I say, the corporate job. And it was not to demonize corporate jobs, but it was because he thought as an individual that got him through. And that creates possibilities. And it certainly did for me as well. Thinking on my own terms and wow, that's cool. The juggling, the coin collecting created opportunities and opened up space that wouldn't have been opened otherwise.
You had a really good point because I really encourage, I do a lot of leadership presentations as well. And I talk to people about, getting clarity of their own personal mission statement, what you stand for, your why. But to delve in, the other thing I thought was really good is, our focus is help young leaders. And the reality of the world is, you may have numerous career paths, and you certainly have shown that. So I got to delve into the next thing, and that tell us about the punk band, and of course, tell us how that got started and a leadership lesson, because I know you use some of that in your keynotes as well.
Absolutely. Well, and I use it in the book, certainly. I don't always use it in the keynotes because the thing is that there's a stick. I'll put it this way. People respond to hearing that I was in a punk band in one of two ways. Your way, which is to smile and be like, wow, that sounds interesting. Tell me more about that. Or really? Like they're not sure what to think of that. Did I have a mohawk? Did I, what was that? What was that like? What did that, anti-establishment position did I take? Well, I was in a band. I talk about it quite a bit in the book, actually. I was in a band that was almost a social experiment in a way, trying to see what happened when we delved into authenticity. And today, authenticity is a buzzword. People are, big on authenticity. Well, they weren't in the 90s when I was delving into it. And this was a place where we were a bit before our time, meaning, I said a few minutes ago, I'd be very egotistical if I said I was a 12-year-old perceiving, traditional career models as being outdated. That didn't happen. What did happen was that in the 90s, I was talking about authenticity when that wasn't even on the radar of people yet. So, I mean, it's certainly not in the punk scene. In the way that we were doing it, it wasn't the norm. Let's just say that it wasn't the norm. There were certainly people talking about it, but it wasn't the norm. And what we were trying to do was, sure, sing songs that were socially and politically aware, yes. But we were also, always, from my perspective, trying to figure out why people think and feel the way they do. What makes people tick? What makes them go? What makes them show up at a punk show, at any music show, at any event where people congregate? Well, what makes them show up is that they want to feel as though they're a part of something. They want to feel as though they matter. They want to feel as though they're meaningful. And I say those things with the utmost respect to human beings. That's what people want. They want to feel as though they matter, that they're a valuable contributor to something meaningful. This is extraordinarily significant. And the lyrics that we were writing and the shows we were playing were an exploration of that idea. If we create the possibility for people to show up and feel that they matter, what happens? Well, sometimes they show up. Sometimes there's hundreds of people. Sometimes there's one person. Literally, we played a show to one person once. And sometimes, yeah, sometimes there's 10 people. Okay, so when 10 people show up and they're in a venue that maybe holds 150 or 200, what about those 10? Do we still play the show? Of course we do. We played when there's only one person. We played when the night was off, when the night was on. You show up and you do the work. So that's what we learned about leadership from that experience, certainly. And what I learned from that experience is that, if 10 people show up and they have the best of intentions, in that moment, it's possible to then have those people feel like they matter. And that's not me as a god, guru, or king telling them, congratulations, you now matter, but rather cultivating the sense amongst people who had showed up that I valued them being there, that I was listening to them, that I cared about them, and they cared about us. And in doing so, created the conditions where people organically felt like they mattered. Sounds like a soft skill. That's a valuable, valuable life and leadership lesson right there. Have your people feel like they matter. And if you can't have that happen, make it. Make the conditions so that people can come into that on their own. That's an extraordinarily valuable leadership lesson, because if your people don't feel like they matter, and in fact, thinking of them as your people is almost diminutive. If people with whom you work don't feel as though they matter, what are you doing? Like what is your initiative? What are your goals? What, oddly authoritarian, singular minded vision are you dragging people along on? Have people feel like they matter and have them know that there are valuable contributors to something meaningful. And you've got next level teamwork, actual teamwork where people are contributing to something and aiming towards a goal. That's closer to the leadership that I think we all want to see.
Great
Well
point.
said.
And I think it also is important that you as a leader know your worth too before entering leadership. And the first person we have to lead is ourselves. Coach always says that. That's a concept that I like to take with me too. So whether you're leading a whole team of people, a whole company of people, you're a leader on stage in front of those hundreds of people, or you're performing to that one, it doesn't matter. Leading yourself is important. What are some of the ways that as you grew as a leader, you learned some ways to become a better leader of yourself?
Yeah, I think that's a great choice. And you're catching me in a moment where, for the last year, I wrote the book. Okay. And this is not me ham-fistedly segueing into book talk to promote myself. But a little over about a year and a half ago, I got the book contract. And I spent a year writing the book, development editing the book, copy editing the book, indexing the book, and then releasing the book under the Wiley imprint. And that was all consuming. Well, what happens when you're in an all consuming project, when your focus is basically absolute? Well, other things fall by the wayside. What fell by the wayside for me? Physical fitness. You're talking to me today on a day when, admittedly, I am today in the worst physical shape of my life. And I say that only because I didn't exercise yesterday. So today is the worst day.
Mm.
Um, is that the end of all things? No. It means that as soon as we're done, I've got a couple hours before my next interview. I'm actually interviewing somebody, and I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to go to the gym because that's what I learned from these experiences. To answer your question, is you have to take care of yourself. You have to, in the midst of everything that's going on, never forget that. And over the last year and a half, I certainly at times forgot that, meaning I forgot that I need to sleep. I forgot that I need to drink water. I forgot that I need to go to the gym. I forgot that I need to eat healthier because that establishes a baseline. And I get that people get all consumed into the work that they do. And I recognize that people become, is the word myopic when you're just focusing, intensely on something. And that's great. And a lot of things get accomplished that way. And I know that the band accomplished great things. I mean, I've made a living throughout my life as a keynote speaker juggler. I sit on the board of two different coin organizations and write for three different coin magazines. And great, I've accomplished some interesting things that I like. Got to go to the gym. Got to take care of yourself.
Mm.
Be a leader of yourself first and foremost. I mean, that's essential. That's essential. We have to take care of ourselves. And everyone told me when the book comes out, you're going to immediately wish you could change things. Well, interestingly, I don't necessarily wish I could change a lot of things in the book, but one thing that I would add, if the book was a dynamic experience, that the people buying it today got a different book than the people who bought it last week. Today, there'd be a chapter, almost like a coda at the end, which says, "Oh, P.S. Really, the thing I said throughout the book about taking care of yourself, really actually do that. Do as I say, not as I did.
Mm.
It's very, very, very important. I didn't realize just how non-leader of myself I was being until I sat back when the book came out and thought, "Ooh, boy, I really need to get back to the gym." That's essential too. We got to take care of ourselves.
Yeah, that's hugely important. I encourage people all the time, I challenge them, do you have a personal wellness plan, and a personal growth plan? Those are two things and in fact, one of the things I teach people is having non-negotiables every day. And like one of my non-negotiables is I exercise every day, so that those are
I love that.
yeah.
I
So
love that.
so those are some things. Well, Greg, we're going to dive in a little bit about now you're a leader taking over a team. All right. Tell us, what advice would you give a young leader to, a famous, you're hearing a lot about it, but I still think a lot of people ignore is, how do you build that culture so that team can reach the potential?
Okay, so here's my initial caveat before I say anything, which is that uh, I am not exactly sure what would work best for everybody in every situation with every goal, every corporate association structure. Because if I said to you, day one, come in and wreck shop, let everyone know who's boss. That might work in some situations. It's not what I would do. It's not my style, right? If
Yeah.
I said, come in on day one and have a healing circle and spend the first 3 months and everyone shares their feelings. And when you've worked through all that as a therapist, move on. That's not me either. That might also help, right? It might be a good idea. So I don't know the answer to that, and I do at the same time. And the part that I do know is day one, you listen. and you start listening to the people with whom you're working. And that sounds almost like I've just read Trite Answer on Leadership 101, a guide to simple ideas, but I mean it. Listen, 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 and pay attention and listen. I think it's so important to listen to people because when people feel listened to, they then, and this is just an ancillary benefit, say to themselves, wow, I feel heard. Well, if you feel heard or you feel seen, then you exist. And if you exist, then you matter. And in the mattering is the thing that we've been talking about throughout this conversation that people need most. So start by listening and just ask people what they're feeling and thinking, and ask people where are we? Our goal is to make widgets. How are we doing with the construction of widgets? How are our systems? Hey, I sit up here in an office. I make 10 times as much money as you do. You're literally pouring the plastic molds for the widgets. How's the process? How's it going? How are you feeling? How do you like it? When you guys are, are taking a break, or it's Friday night, are you talking about how much you hate this job or how much this is a great place to be? If let's say it's a team and you're not making widgets, let's say it's a team working on something, same question. How are you feeling? What are you thinking? How's it going? It doesn't have to be how are you feeling? Let's all weep together and have a hug circle. But it can literally be how are you feeling about how things are going? What could be better? What could be improved? Where are we failing? And in listening, there's vital information. Absolutely vital information. I think that it has to start. I think it has to start there with a process of active and deep and actually attentive and caring listening. I think it's very important.
Mm.
I got to delve in one last question before John will, but because it's curious, because I was a head coach at four different high schools, and I felt like I got smarter from each one, and that was really interesting. The last place I was coached there for 20 years, and we had a lot of success. But that's what I started with, and I didn't do those and the other ones, and that was a listening tour. I met with every single player in the program and had questions about what they were about, and those kinds of things. I really encourage it. I'm right with you on that. I got to delve into it because obviously we did a lot of things in trying to team building. I know you've wrote in the book about a couple team building activities. Can you share one with us?
Sure. I mean, there was one that, if I'm remembering correctly, where, and even if I didn't, even if this one isn't in the book, it should have been. And if it is in the book and I'm forgetting, it shows what a genius I am for including it in the book. But there was a moment where and I'll tell you the backstory of this. I was called in to do a corporate event on the East Coast, a keynote that I was under the impression was, if I remember correctly, a keynote of X number of minutes, followed by all day being at the event, just interacting with people, just listening to people, connecting with people, learning about their business, or something along those lines. And when I showed up, I was actually doing a keynote and then facilitating an all-day training. And I found out the night before. So I needed 8 hours of material, not 80 minutes or 40 minutes. I needed 8 hours of material. I found out literally as I landed the night before.
Wow.
I need the whole day of material. So one of the things I did, and I can't remember all of a sudden if this is in the book or not, and I hope it was. And if it's not, then here we go. Um, I had people sit down at tables after I got done with the keynote, and I said, okay, I want you to imagine that you are here at work and you can basically have anything you want at work. What would you have? What would you have? What would you have? You can let your imagination run wild. You could have anything you want at work. What would you have? And people were saying like, well, I think that, it'd be really nice to have another water cooler. I'm like, made out of 24 karat gold, because you can have anything you want. There's no limits, there's no budget, anything you want. Well, all of a sudden people started coming up with a range of things from the outlandish to the sane, I guess you'd say, right? They were talking about, we want the streets paved with gold and all this sort of thing, sure. But they were also saying things like, you know what? I think it'd be really nice to have a week off every month for vacation where you could just reset, come in, proverbial, guns blazing, just, all excited for 3 weeks out of the month and then take a month off to reset, restructure. I think we'd be more productive. And of course we can't do that because we can't afford that. We can't afford, to pay people for a week off every month. And then I said, okay, we have this myriad of responses of what you'd have if there was no budgets and no limits. Now you have an unlimited budget and you have no limits. What would be the steps that you'd take to put that in place. Let your imagination run wild with how you'd fund that. Would you just give everyone a pile of money and say, good luck, everybody? Hey, you get a week off every month? No. How would you structure that? What would you do? How would you approach that? And what happened was really interesting. There were some tables out of the hundreds of people who were there who came up with the most ridiculous ideas. They were laughing, they were having fun. That's a win, right? That's a win. If you're sitting in a training and you're brainstorming, laughing, and having fun, that's a win because the lesson is, hey, when we work together, sometimes we laugh and have fun. What did that feel like? When was the
Yeah.
last time you did that at work? It was pretty fun, right? I mean, there's a chapter in my book on, basically engage with laughter, right? And how important that is to have fun at work. But then there were other tables that said, okay, in an ideal world, we would do this outlandish thing. And here's how we would actually make that happen if we had the money to do it. And the lesson there was discussion, conversation, negotiation, planning. And all of a sudden, sure, are we going to have a roller coaster that goes through the entire office building that is free? You know what I mean? And, whatever. No, but here's how we would build it. Here's how we would contract it. Here's how we would plan it. Here's how we would propose it. Here's how we would suggest it to people who maybe didn't want that. And that was a fascinating exercise in teamwork and leadership. So I'm not sure if that one made it in the book. Forgive me for forgetting my own content, but that's the one that comes to mind immediately was that lesson in negotiation and conversation and laughter that quite honestly came from my own desperation. I called the speakers bureau that represented me the night before. I said, hey, I've got some interesting news. I'm not just doing a keynote tomorrow morning. I'm doing like 10 hours of training or, whatever it was. And they said, oh my gosh, what are you going to do? I'm like, I'm not sure. I'm freaked out. So, I mean, the job for me and the leadership lesson for me was to walk in the next morning with a plan. So I had to come up with a plan. I worked on it all night, came up with a plan.
Mm. Well, you've said some really powerful things so far, Greg. One thing I'd go back to too is listening. I think bad leaders have a lot in common at times, but I think from my experience, what bad leaders lack most is listening skills. And what you talk about the importance of listening, getting down to the same level as everybody in your organization, no matter who they are. And then also you just mentioned the power of preparation too. Are there one or two other characteristics of really strong leaders that you talk about in your book that you'd also like to share with us besides listening and preparation?
Yeah, I think that it wasn't, the intention in the book wasn't necessarily to document the qualities of leaders. I love your question. Wasn't to document the qualities of leaders, but almost like what Coach was talking about, that when we coach ourselves, what are the aspects of ourselves that then become leader-like? I guess that's what I was thinking as I was writing. So, for example, Wiley basically wanted a business book. They wanted a business book. Okay. I didn't necessarily want a business book. I didn't want to go against Wiley, but what I wanted was a personal development book that was masquerading as a business book.
Mm.
Sorry to break the surprise, Wiley, if you're listening. I think they know now. So I wanted a personal development book that was masquerading as a business book because I wanted a book that I could refer back to as reminders to myself. And I have. I mean, I refer back to this book constantly. And it's almost as if I'm reading someone else's book in a way, because I need to remember, for example, to now answer your question, chapter 2, keep your eyes on the knife. It's a juggling metaphor. It's not chapter 2, it might be chapter 4. There's some introductory chapters, but the point is the second of the strategies is keep your eyes on the knife. It's a juggling metaphor. If you have two beanbags and a knife, and you're juggling them, where's your focus going to be? I hope it's going to be on the knife. If it's on the beanbags, I would suggest that is an ill-fated choice. If it's on the knife, you're protecting yourself, you're self-aware, you're also conscious of the mission critical thing that's literally flying in front of your face. And if the knife impales you, game over. If the knife falls on the ground, not good. The audience is not impressed. But if you can calculate and determine, or even just figure out and feel what is the mission critical task ahead of you, what is the thing that if it falls or fails, it's game over, or things are ruined, or things are inextricably shifted. If you can figure out what that is, it's going to help you figure out where to keep your focus and you'll be able to resist the allure of distraction. Well, that's a leadership quality that I think is very important. I think being able to keep our eyes on the knife, sure, but determining what the knife is. So when people come in on Monday morning, are people happy? Are they feeling good? And even if you don't care if they're happy or feeling good, are they effective? at what they're doing. You know what I mean? And I hope that you care if they're feeling good, right? You see what I'm getting at. But are they effective at what they're doing? Are they part of a team? And if not, that certainly becomes the knife. That becomes the knife in the moment. Keep your eyes on that, because if you lose your people, you lose the game. So I think that if you keep your eyes on the knife and are constantly reassessing what the knife is, then you are in a position of being a stronger leader. So that's an example, and I could draw more certainly from the book, but that's an example that was included in a sense to answer the question that you asked.
Love
I
that.
just got to interject, Greg. Wasn't there a story when you were a young juggler where you didn't keep your eye on the knife?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the whole concept came from me, age 12, about to perform in Woodbury, Connecticut, in the town parade that celebrated the whatever it was, the 150th, 250th year of the town, that culminated at a park in the center of town where everybody showed up to see the Bennick boy and his new juggling skills. And I'm joking in a way because everybody was there for the town. I happen to be a feature right in this parade. So we get downtown. There's hundreds of people gathered around me. This is my big public debut. I've done birthday parties up until this point. I've done, a school assembly, but this is the town is going to watch me juggle. Well, I had this idea. I was going to juggle a knife. And I didn't know then that there were big flashy knives that you could get for juggling and performing that maybe weren't the sharpest, that they were theatrical props. I didn't know that. I just wanted to juggle a knife. I thought this would be cool. So I took one of my mom's kitchen knives. Why not? A big chopping knife. And I had this concept that I was going to take a carrot and slice through the carrot and say, ladies and gentlemen, these knives are sharp. And on the word sharp, slice through the carrot. And it would be very dramatic. It'd be dramatic because everyone would see how sharp the knife was. And I also knew that you could take a playing card probably and cut through a carrot if you really wanted to. And I'm joking. I don't know if you can. I mean, I don't want people sitting around playing cards ruining decks of cards or carrots for that matter. But the point is that it doesn't take much of a knife to cut through a carrot, right? But ladies and gentlemen, these knives are swing sharp and cut through the carrot. Well, in the moment, as I was in front of this crowd, I got excited about the crowd. What are they going to think of me? What are they going to say to me in school the next day? This is so exciting. And I held the carrot out and I said, ladies and gentlemen, and I swung that knife and cut through the carrot. These knives, or this knife is sharp. And on sharp, I cut through not the carrot, but because I'd been cutting the carrot shorter and shorter with every consecutive swing, I cut through my finger. And in my public debut in front of the entire town of Woodbury, where I think it was 3 knives, it might have even been that I had, these knives are sharp. I cut through my finger and was bleeding. And it wasn't a wound that's significant enough that I lost my finger, but it was significant enough that there was blood flying all over the place as I then had to do this show while juggling. And little Greg standing there bleeding in front of the audience with juggling props flying in the air, learned how impactful that performance was, where every year when I would go back to my town in Connecticut over decades, people would see me saying, hey, Greg, remember that time you cut your finger? You were doing that juggling show and you cut your finger. And they still remembered that. So the point is, I didn't have my eyes on the knife. I had my focus elsewhere. What's the audience going to think about me? What's their applause going to be like when I succeed? How's this going to feel for me when I'm victorious? I took my eyes off the knife, and in taking my eyes off the knife, I took my eyes off of the blade of an actual product in my hand, the knife, that then impacted me literally. So I wrote the chapter in my book, Keep Your Eyes on the Knife, to resist the allure of distraction. Sure, the audience matters, the team matters. But when you go into the game, and this is me, telling the maestro about the game, right? But when you go into the game, if you're thinking to yourself, all right, team, this is going to be a big day. Everyone's going to be clapping for us when we win. And won't it feel really nice to hear everybody's clap? It's like, no, 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 no. Step back. How are we going to win this game? Keep your eyes on the knife, keep your eyes on the knife. It was just a restructuring of priorities.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And there's one other concept into the book that I certainly don't want you to give away the whole book. We want our listeners to get it. Reclaim the moment, 7 strategies to build a better now. But you also talk about this concept of leaping into the dark.
Sure.
as a leader. Could you just, maybe give us a little preview of what that is? And then I certainly want our audience to learn more through the book.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. The whole idea is leap in the dark to embrace the possibility of success. Well, we often are impeded when we start something new by fear of failure. We don't want to fail. We don't want to fall apart. We don't want to look stupid. We don't want to seem like we don't know what we're doing. So we often don't try. Well, what about fear of success? That's equally powerful because let's say this podcast episode is listened to by 200 million people. And all of a sudden, my phone starts ringing. And all of a sudden, the number of keynotes that I get go from a handful a month to 100 a month, and I can't accept them all. And as a result, I can't spend time with my girlfriend. I can't go visit my parents. I have to restructure the way I live. Yeah, gosh, that sounds good, I guess. Maybe that's a little bit intimidating. I'm not sure I really want that. Gosh, I hope people don't listen to this podcast. I don't want things to change that much. You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
Fear of success can be intimidating. And that was an outlandish example, but what happens if we succeed? I think psychologically we fear the potential for change because change is intimidating and change is scary. That's not, I'm not saying anything that's never been said before here, but I think that the potential for success oftentimes is a deterrent to trying as well. So my invitation in the chapters to leap into the unknown and leap into the dark and see where that lands, see what happens when we do that thing. And that thing being whatever it is that you want to be doing with your team, whether it's as a leader, whether it's as a participant, whether it's as an artist, a family member, whatever it might be, leaping into the dark to see what happens, I think is a better choice than not leaping into the dark and just thinking, gosh, I wonder what would have happened had I tried. I think that's important.
Yeah.
Great point.
Totally
So,
agree.
Greg, as we're getting close to the end, we really appreciate your time, and it was really nice that you sent me a copy of your book. I really enjoyed it, and I know you said you were reading my book as well. So,
It's
thank you.
it's awesome. Yeah, I mean
So,
this is
it,
great. And I already have somebody I'm passing this along to, not to keep, but to borrow because you signed this copy for me. But
yeah,
my mom, who's an avid reader and loves inspirational stories about people transforming, overcoming, working with, working through, is going to eat up every word of this book. I can't wait to present it to her. It's
well,
going to be
thank you. I appreciate that. So, but I got to ask, because I've had this scenario a few times in my speaking career where I've spoke to a business and the leader of the team or the CEO, whatever, does like a short little presentation before me. And often that's great for me because they're terrible. And so, and I always think to myself, if I'm that bad as a presenter, then, but so with that in mind, you've done thousands of presentations now around the world. What advice would you give to a leader? Because we talked about the essence of communication starts with listening, but I think it is a nice leadership uh, skill is to be able to communicate effectively. So when they're presenting, what advice can you wrap it up in a couple things that they could do to be able to have a powerful presentation to their
Yeah,
team or organization?
absolutely.
So
Absolutely. Yeah. Keep listening. And here's why. Listening doesn't just mean that I am quiet and I listen to everything around me. It also means reading the room. So
mhm.
as I'm speaking, I'm reading the room. I've been doing that throughout this entire conversation. I'm watching verbal cues from each of you. When I get to a part of the story that I think is funny, are you responding? When I get to the moment that I say something poignant, and I've surprised myself 20 times in this conversation by saying things that I think are poignant that come out of my mouth, and I think, wow, that was great. If you're nodding and you're with me and I'm paying attention to you and listening, I not just keep going, but I take you along with me on a journey. And when we're speaking, that's what we're doing. We are inviting an audience with us on a journey. And we are a guide, we're a chaperone in a way, and keep listening. Because as you're speaking, you're not listening to the sound of your own voice that's gratuitous and arguably boring. I think it'll lead to a bad speech. And yes, it's important to develop speaking skills. And yes, that comes easier for some of us than others of us. There are ways to develop speaking skills. I'm happy to talk to listeners all day long if they want to write me about how to develop speaking skills. Happy to do it. But the point is, we have to be listening as well. Read the room, pay attention to the people you're talking to, pay attention to cues, verbal and nonverbal. because if the audience is with you on the journey, the speech is going to be more effective, even if you're scared to speak, even if you're not incredibly developed as a speaker. If the audience is with you, the speech is still going to be more effective.
Mhm. Well
Yeah,
said.
great point. Greg, I know we talked a lot about your book, but I want to remind our audience it's up on Amazon. It's up wherever you get your books. Also, if you're a lot like me and you prefer to listen, it's also on Audible too, which is really cool too. And you were actually the narrator of
I
that,
am.
so I'm sure that was a fun experience to
It's
go through that.
amazing. And just in case listeners ever want to know what it's like to narrate a book, imagine that you are in a closet that is half the size of a closet. And in the closet, there's an iPad and a microphone and a comfortable chair to sit in. And basically, the audio engineer says, okay, test one, two, test one, two. Okay, go ahead. And you read your entire book for 3 days nonstop. That's exactly how it works. So yeah, it was fun, and I was really happy to have that experience. And people, of course, can find the book. Yes, anywhere books are sold. If it's not sold at that location, they can get and order the book for you without a doubt, anywhere in the world.
Up on Amazon or yeah, any of those other locations. Reclaim the moment. 7 strategies to build a better now. Link also down in the show notes. And Greg, I have to say, just as an aside, I'm also I'm one of those audiobook producers who is that annoying guy who keeps saying I want to hear that again and again and again until you find the right intonation. And I've also narrated some too, so I totally resonate with what you're saying there.
That's great, and it's important, right? Because if I say to myself, Chapter one, hey everybody, how you doing? My name is Greg Bennick, and somebody hears the sing-songiness in my voice and I don't hear it, it's up to that producer, up to you to say, whoa, 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 relax, start again, try it this way. And that happened many, many, many times. So in 18 hours of recording, we got a 9-hour audiobook because of false starts, stops and starts. I said my name was Greg Bernick instead of Bennick. I didn't realize it, that sort of thing. So it happens
That's
all the
that's
time.
pretty good though, getting that in 18 hours. But that
Yeah.
sing-songiness, we call that puking. So I know exactly what you mean. But not to take away from the fact that this book is also available in a copy as well, if you prefer a physical copy, or obviously the digital copy too. So Greg, is there any other way if maybe we want to bring you in, or maybe we want to be one of the next 100 this month to book you for a speaking gig? How can we get in touch with you and learn more about what you do?
Well, go to my website to start, gregbennick.com, and that's GregBennick.com. If people would like to follow me on Instagram, again, it's at Greg Bennick, GregBennick. People can certainly find me on LinkedIn. It's linkedin.com, or how do the LinkedIn URLs work? LinkedIn.com/IN/Greg, whatever it might be. If you're on LinkedIn, you can figure out how to find me on LinkedIn. I can't remember my exact URL right now. The point is that website, social media, LinkedIn, I'd be happy to hear from anybody. But the website's great because then you can, see a little bit about what I do, read some blog posts, and then get in touch through the contact form. I would love to hear from anybody anytime. That would be great.
Well,
Amazing,
Greg,
Greg.
we
Thank
appreciate. I've enjoyed the conversation. We look to continue our conversation and grow our relationship. But it was a lot of fun having you today.
I appreciate both of you immensely. Connections matter, and this connection this morning felt great. So thanks to you and to all your listeners for listening for sure.